The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative
on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Diving headfirst into the Stone Zone, if you love political theater and you're interested in justice, you had to be mesmerized by the performance of Dr. Anthony Fauci, the COVID czar, who repeatedly invoked the Fifth Amendment more than 100 times before the Senate Homeland Security Committee on Wednesday to avoid giving honest testimony about his disgraceful and dishonest actions during the COVID-19 pandemic. Questioned by Chairman Rand Paul about the origins of the China virus, the taxpayer-funded gain-of-function research, and deleted records, Fauci refused to answer. Now, some have criticized Fauci, saying even when he was asked questions such as whether a folder was sitting on the desk before him, he stonewalled all questions. In all fairness, it's important to understand that when one is legitimately using their Fifth Amendment right, asserting their Fifth Amendment right, you must answer all questions with the Fifth Amendment. You don't get to pick and choose which questions to answer and on which questions to assert the right. In the case of Fauci, however, there's a serious question as to whether he was entitled to use his Fifth Amendment right because he has a sweeping preemptive pardon that covers the period in question. Now, I want to be absolutely precise and I want to be correct about this. When I went to the House Intelligence Committee, I did not assert my Fifth Amendment right. In retrospect, if I knew that they were going to take immaterial answers and twist them into thought crimes or process crimes, I probably should have. When, however, I was subpoenaed by the January 6th committee, and I realized that this January 6th committee was not only illegally constituted, refusing to take the appointees of the Republican minority leader, that Cassidy Hutchinson, an aide to former White House Chief Mark Meadows, would fabricate testimony against me. When I learned that they would use both AI-generated audios and videos to twist things that I had said or put words in my mouth that I never said at all, yes, I asserted my Fifth Amendment rights. It does have legitimate purpose. But in this case, Rand Paul argued that the pardon undercuts Fauci's claimed fear of self-incrimination, while Fauci's lawyer suggested he could still face other legal exposure. Most interesting was the fact that his attorney repeatedly interrupted until Paul finally had the attorney removed from the hearings. If you watch this on TV, the lawyer was literally screaming and trying to stop the proceedings. Don't worry about Dr. Fauci. He had 6 other lawyers there also representing them. Fauci now, of course, says the investigation is political persecution, but his behavior looks incredibly suspicious, and I really see why. Example 1. In his private diary on March 15, 2020, he wrote, and I quote, "I spoke with Bill de Blasio, former mayor of New York, and convinced him based on what I was saying publicly and my conversation tonight to close the New York schools." In his public statement under oath, he said, "Show me a school that I shut down. Show me a factory that I shut down. Never, I never did." Sample 2. The lockdowns. In his private diary in March of 2020, Fauci recorded recommending the closure of schools, bars, and restaurants. He also wrote that he and others convinced President Trump to extend the federal mitigation guidelines from 15 days to 30 days. Under oath, in public, he said, "First of all, I didn't recommend locking anything down." That's perjury. Sample number 3, face masks. In his public statement, he said on March 8, 2020, "There's no reason to be walking around with a mask." In his private diary in spring of 2020, Fauci wrote, "We probably were too strong in saying masks do not work." Sample number 4. In his public statement of March 2020, he said, "It's not providing the perfect protection that people think it is." In his public testimony, he said, "There's no doubt that wearing masks protects you." That's June of 2020. Example number 5, why masks were initially discouraged. He says, and I quote in a public comment, "There's no reason to be walking around with a mask." Later, he publicly said, Fauci explained that earlier guidelines were influenced by concerns over preserving mask supplies for healthcare workers. Example number 6, the Wuhan seafood market. In his private diary, January 26, 2020, Fauci says, The first infection was in early December and was not connected to the market. Now we know the market was not the source, it was the amplifier. Those are his own words. That proves that he lied before the Senate committee chaired by Rand Paul. Sample number 7. Again, this has to do with the early laboratory origins and those conversations. His private diary, January 31st, 2020. Fauci documented discussions with leading virologists regarding unusual circumstances of the SARS-CoV-2 and recorded that scenarios involving an accidental laboratory release were discussed. In one diary entry includes the following exact language: either accidentally released or deliberately released by a crazy person in the lab, the former being the most likely. But in public, Fauci repeatedly stated that the available scientific evidence favored a natural origin while investigations continued. Example number 8, gain-of-function research. In his sworn Senate testimony on May 11, 2020, Fauci said the National Institute of Health has never, ever, and does not now fund gain-of-function research in the Wuhan Institute of Virology. In his private diary, Fauci noted that certain experiments' results could be interpreted by some as gain of function, paid for by you and I, the taxpayers. Sample number 9, the gain-of-function definition. In his Senate testimony, Fauci said the National Institute of Health has never, ever, and does not now fund gain-of-function research. Then, in his congressional testimony in 2024, he fudged, saying, well, gain-of-function is a very nebulous term. Then there's example number 10, 6 feet of social distancing. Public guidelines put out by Fauci during the pandemic said promoted maintaining 6 feet of distance as a key mitigation measure. But in his congressional testimony, he said, it just sort of appeared. I was not aware of any studies. It was just an empiric decision that wasn't based on any data. Sample number 11, following the science. In his public messaging, Fauci said pandemic policies were repeatedly presented as science-based recommendations, but in his congressional testimony on 6 Month guidance, he said that was an empirical decision that was not based on data. Direct contradiction. Example number 12, herd immunity threshold. The early public estimate was put out by Fauci to be 60 to 70% immunity. Then later, his public estimate was approximately 75 to 85%, with later comments suggesting it could approach 90%. But later, Fauci acknowledged that his public statements evolved in part alongside increasing public willingness to receive the vaccination. Sample number 13, school closings versus reopening. In his private diary, Fauci wrote, I convinced him, meaning the president, the mayor, to close the New York schools. Later in his diary, he said, I never said do not open the schools. He also wrote, we should have as a default position our intention to open the schools. Sample number 14. In his private diary throughout the pandemic, Fauci recorded, A, that he convinced Mayor Bill de Blasio to close the schools. He also said he influenced California officials through his public messaging to close the schools. He helped persuade President Trump to extend the mitigation messages, and he advised governors and senior government officials. Later in public, he said, I never did. I gave a public health recommendation, and people made a decision based on that. The documents that we have seen released really leave a substantial number of unresolved questions. Did Fauci's private understanding evolve differently than his public messaging? These diary entries certainly indicate that they did. Did his description of his own influence change after the pandemic? Were technical definitions used differently in public testimony than in internal discussions? Were some public statements simplified in ways that omitted important uncertainty? Which important contradictions were explained by context and which deserve further investigation? The diary does prove one record. Public interviews, Senate testimony, congressional hearings, and media appearances provide an entirely different view. The purpose of all these comparisons is not to determine guilt or innocence, but does show you the discrepancies between what Fauci said in public and what he said in his diaries. Senator Josh Hawley confronted Fauci in the testimony today over his wealth and the celebrity he accumulated while Americans lost loved ones, businesses, jobs, schooling, and basic freedoms during the pandemic. Hawley accused Fauci of profiteering while families suffered and demanded accountability for the policies he pushed that devastated our country. Fauci has consistently disputed claims that his agency funded the dangerous research in Wuhan, but the evidence shows the contrary. Americans have heard years of shifting explanations, their missing records, suppressed debate, and official evasions. The country deserves the whole truth about COVID's origins, federal funding, possible cover-ups, and whether powerful officials misled Congress while escaping consequences. And when all is said and done, Dr. Fauci, who I really think has truly earned the title of the American Mengele, deserves to be charged at a minimum for lying under oath to the Senate, at a maximum for crimes against humanity. The most disturbing thing about all of this to me is the fact that Dr. Fauci, who was really in love with his newfound celebrity, I'm working on a long piece about how he gushed about the fact that he was named as the sexiest man alive. And people came out with a Fauci bobblehead, and he was being praised by Julia Roberts. And Brad Pitt played him on Saturday Night Live, and Billy Crystal played him in a different skit on Saturday Night Live. This guy was in love with himself. But the most troubling thing about all of this is that Dr. Fauci and his wife were quite legally allowed to make millions and millions of dollars off of the very vaccination that they were seeking to make mandatory, but which nevertheless they convinced millions of Americans to take. To me, that should be a clear conflict of interest. That should be illegal. So not only do I believe that Dr. Fauci is responsible for the deaths of literally hundreds of thousands of innocent people, but he and his wife, who's also a public health official in that time, made millions of dollars while others were suffering. Will anybody be charged? Will Fauci be charged? That remains to be seen. That, of course, is up to the Justice Department. Today's proceeding was a legislative proceeding, and it does speak volumes that Fauci pled the Fifth when he had no legal right nor necessity to do so. Again, even though his pardon was signed by an auto pen, there is no danger to self-incrimination if you believe that pardon is legitimate and will hold up in court. When we come back, we're going to talk about the ridiculous award by the New York courts to E. Jean Carroll. That's the woman who claimed that Donald Trump assaulted her in the women's dressing room at Bergdorf Goodman on Fifth Avenue. There's a lot of holes in that story. We'll get into it on the other side, right here in the Stone Zone. I'm Roger Stone. You're listening to the Red Apple Audio Networks. Whatever you do, don't go away.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
This is the Stone Zone. Now, get in the zone. It's the Stone Zone.
A man who's gone through hell, but he's kept going, and he's smart, and he's strong, and people love him. Not everybody, but people love him and respect him. Roger Stone. Where's Roger Stone?
Here's Roger Stone.
Welcome back into the Stone Zone. President Trump and the Justice Department are asking the U.S. Supreme Court to review the ridiculous $83.3 million defamation verdict awarded to wacky, deranged left-wing writer E. Jean Carroll. This is the case in which E. Jean Carroll falsely claims that President Donald Trump, as a private citizen, sexually assaulted her in the women's dressing room at Bergdorf Goodman, a high-end department store on New York's Fifth Avenue. The president has flatly denied that. It's very interesting that E. Jean Carroll, a writer, said that she was wearing a particular Diane von Furstenberg wraparound dress on the occasion that she was assaulted, even though she could never remember the actual date, when in fact that dress in which she was pictured on the cover of New York Magazine, it turns out, had not even been designed or produced at the time of the alleged incident. The president was ultimately charged not with sexual assault, but with defamation. Those denials were issued through an official White House statement and in answers to reporters. The Justice Department argues that President Trump was acting within the scope of his presidential duties, meaning the federal government, not personally, and should have been substituted as a defendant under the Westfall Act. And this pertains to his specific denial of the earlier verdict. Former Attorney General Bill Barr, hardly a Trump ally, made that determination in 2020, but Biden Attorney General Merrick Garland later withdrew it, allowing the lawsuit to proceed against Trump personally as part of the lawfare campaign meant to destroy President Trump's reputation following the election heist of 2020. Attorney General Pam Bondi restored the certification in 2020, but the Second Circuit rejected that move. Now the administration says that ruling threatens the ability of future presidents to respond forcefully to attacks without facing crushing personal liability. President Trump's private attorneys are also asking the justices to consider presidential immunity, arguing that the appeals court never decided whether his official statements were protected. So this is not nearly about one verdict. It's about whether a politically hostile court can punish a president personally for defending himself while in office. An $83.3 million judgment over official presidential remarks is wildly excessive and carries consequences far beyond President Trump. Anyone who's observed E. Jean Carroll can tell she's far from credible, and this ruling is a complete farce. I very specifically remember her on CNN saying that she thought rape was sexy, and the host, of course, cut almost immediately to a commercial. The Supreme Court should take the case, should restore clear constitutional boundaries, and prevent lawfare from becoming a permanent weapon against elected presidents. There's also a question about whether E. Jean Carroll lied under oath, about whether her lawsuit had been funded in advance by billionaire Reid Hoffman, an associate of Jeffrey Epstein, who visited the island many times. There is an open Justice Department investigation about whether E. Jean Carroll lied about that under oath. You're listening to The Stone Zone. I'm Roger Stone. Don't go away, because we'll be right back with more of today's politics.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Yesterday, right here in the Stone Zone, I said that Mayor Mamdani has no place at the September 11th memorial this year or any other year. See, I think the 25th anniversary of September 11th's terrorist attacks is not a political rally, a campaign opportunity, or a stage upon which ambitious political officials should seek to rehabilitate their reputations. This is a sacred day of remembrance dedicated to the nearly 3,000 innocent Americans murdered by Islamic terrorists. The first responders who ran towards the flames while others fled, the military men and women who answered the nation's call in the wars that followed, and the families whose lives were forever shattered. That day of remembrance belongs to them. It does not belong to politicians whose public record demonstrates repeated sympathy for those connected to the very ideology that produced the deadliest attack in American history. So again, I suggest that Mayor Zohran Mamdani stand down in his intention to come to that profound and important remembrance. Just today, I was contacted by a very prominent Democrat political consultant of some note who asked me if I wanted to join him in an effort to recall Mayor Mamdani, an offer that I must admit it was tempting, but which I politely declined. You see, I think given the demographic change in New York City and the fact that a very substantial number of New York voters voted for hope and change without ever knowing exact policies they were voting for, would make victory impossible. If you combine the vote of the Republican and nominee and the independent candidate, former Governor Andrew Cuomo, you do not get more votes than Zohran Mamdani. That tells you how hopeless the electoral situation is. New York City's social experiment is already drawing a legal backlash from the immigrant-owned businesses Mayor Mamdani claims to champion. The Multicultural Business Coalition, representing 50 chambers of commerce and businesses across Asian, African, Caribbean, Hispanic, Middle Eastern, and Jewish communities, has voted to sue the city over Mamdani's plan for taxpayer-funded grocery stores. The mayor wants 5 city-run supermarkets, one in each borough, selling basic foods at a discount of roughly 30%. Small business owners are noting that this is a government-subsidized mess that will result in their bottom lines being destroyed. The grocery store business is not that profitable to begin with, as John Katsimatidis has pointed out, given the rising cost of foods. The proposed stores would operate on city property without paying rent, while private grocers and bodegas must cover rent, taxes, payroll, insurance, and rising wholesale costs. Near the planned East Harlem location, several bodegas already serve the neighborhood, and dozens of grocery stores are within walking distances. The coalition chairman, Frank Garcia, said Mamdani has refused to even meet with the concerned merchants, as his far-left ideology comes before the legitimate concerns of the people of New York. The group plans to raise $1 million to fight the policy in court. When government enters the marketplace, politicians use tax money to undercut private businesses. Then they claim that they're helping the very communities they're actually displacing. These minority business owners worked their tails off for years to build successful businesses, and now the edicts of an arrogant socialist are putting all of that in jeopardy. The way to bring food prices down is through free market competition, lower taxes, reduce regulation, safer streets, and reliable supply chains. New York's immigrant entrepreneurs deserve a fair market, as does anyone in this business, taking into consideration food costs and, of course, shoplifting in a soft-on-crime city. New York's immigrant entrepreneurs actually deserve a fair shake, not the mayor using our tax dollars to finance government stores that could put them out of business and destroy jobs. Meanwhile, President Trump is moving aggressively to protect consumers from higher energy costs that are derived from artificial intelligence. President Trump is moving to protect working Americans from being forced to subsidize big tech's artificial intelligence boom. The White House has expanded its ratepayer protection pledge, bringing 23 governors and nearly 200 utility companies and data center developers into an agreement designed to keep massive new AI facilities from driving up household electricity bills. The principle here is pretty simple. It is that the companies who are building these power-hungry data centers should pay the full cost of electricity, the generation, the transmission, the grid upgrades they require. Families, seniors, and small businesses should not be stuck with the electric bill. President Trump says that America must win the global AI war. He's right about that, especially against communist China. But unlike the Washington establishment's usual approach, handing corporations subsidies and passing the costs down to taxpayers, Trump plans that the industry carry its own weight. The expanded pledge reportedly covers utilities responsible for roughly 80% of America's electricity distribution. Major companies have committed to building, buying, or bringing enough power to support their operations without shifting costs into ordinary customers. These data centers, by the way, don't have to hook into the grid. Elon Musk just paid $1 billion for a Jacksonville, Florida-based generation company. There's a number of new startups out there that can produce energy from hydrogen as well as fossil fuels. It is theoretically possible that you could actually fuel one of these data centers without tapping into the grid at all. This pledge by the president is a good start, but now must be effectuated by additional measures, in my view. Congress and state regulators should turn these promises into enforceable protections. But President Trump is right for setting an example. He's right, we have to unleash American innovation. We have to expand domestic energy production. We do need to strengthen the grid, defend consumers from sneaky corporate welfare measures. This is the America First approach to the AI revolution. Grow the economy, beat China, create jobs, and make sure families don't end up paying the higher electricity bills so big tech can exploit American citizens. Innovation should raise American living standards, but not punish American households with a higher cost of living. Meanwhile, the Democratic Socialists of America are no longer hiding their radical leftist agenda that would destroy the rule of law. Their newly released platform calls for dismantling core American institutions and replacing constitutional government with centralized socialist control. The Democratic Socialists of America want to abolish the Senate and the Electoral College, replace the presidency and the Supreme Court with bodies subordinate to Congress. They want to eliminate ICE. They want to grant mass amnesty and eventually to abolish police departments and prisons entirely. The platform also demands public ownership of America's largest corporations, universal rent control, taxpayer-funded health care and college, cancellation of student debt and reparations, and a 32-hour work week with no reduction in pay. We've already talked about their demands for free food or subsidized food in New York City. On national security, the group proposes defunding the Pentagon, closing overseas military bases, ending all aid to Israel, and weakening immigration enforcement while extending voting rights to permanent non-citizen residents. The Democratic Socialists of America National Co-Chairman Megan Romer confirmed these positions during a television interview, offering Americans a remarkably clear look at what the socialist movement intends to accomplish. This cannot be dismissed as harmless campus radicalism. The DSA-backed candidates are increasingly running and winning on Democrat ballot lines and in primaries. It's not just in New York City, but across the country as well. We saw a veteran congresswoman lose in Colorado only weeks ago. The upcoming Michigan Senate primary will tell us much. That means that every Democrat candidate should be asked whether they support abolishing the Senate, subordinating the Supreme Court, nationalizing major businesses, and eliminating the institutions responsible for enforcing the law and protecting the American people. America's constitutional system, free enterprise, secure borders, a strong military, and equal justice, to me, they're all worth defending. Only MAGA Republicans right now have the courage to stand for these pillars of civilization during this precarious time when the extremists are on the march. As I've said many times here in the Stone Zone, the old Democrat Party, the party of John F. Kennedy and Harry Truman, a Democrat Party that believed in God, believed in capitalism, believed in free enterprise, believed in a strong national defense, and opposed communism, is no longer. If Dan Goldman, who's about as liberal a Democrat as I can imagine, loses in Manhattan to a socialist candidate because Dan Goldman is too conservative for the seat, tells you a lot about where the Democrat Party is today. I don't think that this is just an aberration or an anomaly. I think that this is the wave of the future for the Democrat Party. And as I've said here in the Stone Zone numerous times, if AOC chooses to challenge Chuck Schumer for the U.S. Senate, Chuck Schumer is toast. Meanwhile, New Jersey officials are stonewalling the Trump Justice Department after a software failure reportedly placed thousands of non-citizens on the state's voter rolls. The Justice Department requested identifying and registration records for roughly 6,600 people who told the Motor Vehicle Commission they were not American citizens but were registered to vote anyway. Governor Mikey Carroll refused, claiming privacy laws prevent the state from releasing the information to the federal government. That response is really bizarre. When a government system mistakenly registers ineligible voters and the state admits that some of them cast ballots, the obvious response should be full transparency, immediate cooperation, and a complete public accounting. Instead, New Jersey is withholding records from federal investigators while accusing the Trump administration of politicizing elections. Assistant Attorney General Harmeet Dillon, good friend of mine, says the state has a legal duty to keep ineligible people off of its voter rolls and vowed the department will pursue the information through lawful means. That means a lawsuit. State officials blame a software defect affecting applicants between June of 2023 and June of 2024. The vendor involved says New Jersey's Division of Elections remained responsible for validating eligibility. Either way, somebody failed, and voters deserve answers. These blue states keep their voter rolls dirty by design in order to facilitate fraud. This is at the heart of their scheme to steal elections, you see. If there's somebody on the voting roll who is either ineligible or dead, or perhaps they never existed at all, that's an opportunity to mail in a mail-in ballot. The Trump administration is driving a stake through the heart of their illicit program by insisting that the voting rolls are clean. They're making it clear that only citizens may vote in federal elections, and only through the aggressive enforcement of that basic rule can every lawful ballot be protected. The Trump administration is right to demand these records, accountability, and stronger citizenship verification. New Jersey's refusal only deepens public suspicion. If officials truly believe this was an instant technical mistake, they should open the books and prove that, cooperate with federal investigators, and remove every ineligible registration and prove it. But Mikey Carroll appointing an establishment Republican as a special prosecutor, special investigator, stinks to me of a cover-up. The people of New Jersey, the people of the Garden State, have every right to know the truth about whether the voting lists in that state were willfully opened to people ineligible to vote. I think it was New Jersey where Boss Haig of Jersey City said, "Plan your work and work your plan." When I say that, what I'm saying is I don't think this was a glitch. I think this was purposeful. We see it in multiple states. This is why we need the SAFE Act, by the way. The SAFE Act still stalled in the U.S. Senate as Senator John Thune, the Senate Majority Leader, rushes to get out of town without taking action. For those of you unfamiliar, the SAFE Act is really quite simple. All it says is that one must be a citizen of the United States and one must be able to produce a photo ID in order to be able to vote. Recent poll by McLaughlin and Associates showed that some 87% of the American people, including a majority of Democrats and overwhelming majority of independents, support this simple provision. Yet it takes 60 votes in the U.S. Senate to break the filibuster rule and bring this to a vote. I do think 50 votes exist. I think 51 if you included a tie-breaking vote by Vice President J.D. Vance. There's something wrong with the Republican leadership when they refuse to bring this vital matter to the floor, and I think it is one of the keys to ensuring that the 2026 election is free, fair, and honest.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
He's kept going, and he's smart, and he's strong, and people love him. Not everybody, but people love him and respect him. Roger Stone. Where's Roger Stone?
Here's Roger Stone.
Welcome back into the Stone Zone. Ohio's Republican Governor Mike DeWine, who I refer to as Little Mike DeWine, is facing fierce backlash after opposing President Trump's decision to end temporary protected status, or TPS, for roughly 30,000 Haitian immigrants living in Ohio. These people are in the country illegally. DeWine argues that returning them to Haiti would be dangerous and says that many have helped fill jobs and revive communities such as Springfield, Ohio. I think most of us remember the scandal where Haitians were reportedly eating dogs in the Ohio streets. Perhaps this is the type of community enrichment that the Rhino Governor DeWine wishes to preserve. I knew him when he was Attorney General. He's about 5'3". But the Trump administration is standing by the basically consistent principle that temporary status must actually be temporary. See, the Department of Homeland Security says that the TPS was never intended to become a permanent backdoor amnesty program. It was created for short-term emergencies such as wars or natural disasters, not as an indefinite substitute for lawful immigration. President Trump's policy restores meaning to the law and ends a loophole that is contributing to America's demographic collapse. The decision to return over 180,000 Haitians in the country illegally to their homeland was upheld recently by the federal courts. A nation that continually extends these temporary projections regardless of changing circumstances or congressional intent eventually loses control of its immigration system, and that is exactly what happened to America before President Trump came back to power. Compassion does not require abandoning our sovereignty. Americans can recognize Haiti's instability while still enforcing its own laws, securing our borders, and insisting that immigration decisions serve the national interest. DeWine's concern for workers and local employers is largely hogwash. He's frankly just another weak Republican owned by the amnesty lobby that wants to undercut American wages. See, these Haitian workers will work for less. President Trump was elected to shut the door on this type of republicanism. The Republican Party is a America First party now, no longer the party of Wall Street or of the country clubs. DeWine can lobby for the Chamber of Commerce or take some Coke bucks after he's termed out of office, gone and quickly forgotten. But I don't see President Trump or the officials in his government, such as Stephen Miller, backing down on the issue of the return of these Haitian immigrants. Meanwhile, a federal appeals court delivered a major victory for religious victory, ruling that Kaiser Permanente wrongly dismissed an employee who refused a COVID-19 vaccination because of her faith. Mimi Weiss worked for Kaiser for 20 years and was serving remotely as a senior managerial consultant when the company imposed its vaccination mandate in 2021. Weiss, a Christian of Jewish descent, promptly requested a religious exemption, explained that her beliefs prevented her from introducing foreign substances into what she considered her God-created body temple. Kaiser initially approved the exemption, but after questioning whether some employees' requests were genuine, the company demanded that Weiss submit new answers and disclose more information about her religious practices. In other words, they harassed her. When she declined to play along with the dog and pony show, Kaiser placed her on unpaid leave and ultimately fired her. A lower court sided with the company. But now, in a stunning victory, the Ninth Circuit reversed, ruling that Weiss had provided enough information for Kaiser to understand the conflict between the mandate and her faith. The court also allowed her privacy claim to move forward. This ruling is a welcome rebuke to the authoritarian culture that flourished during the pandemic when corporations and government officials often treated personal conscience and religious convictions as an inconvenience, and they thought that religious liberty was optional. Big Pharma and bureaucrats like Fauci wanted to set the precedent that the right to refuse was no more, that all must submit to the health diktats regardless of how immoral, inhuman, or obscene any individual may have thought they were. Americans should never be forced to surrender their faith, their privacy, or their bodily autonomy to keep a job. That is completely un-American and is abhorrent as the government attacking individuals for their personal choices. The decision does not erase the damage done to Mimi Weiss, but it sends a message that employers cannot interrogate workers about their religious beliefs, move the goalposts, and punish those who refuse to comply with their madness. Thanks for joining us today in the Stone Zone. Until tomorrow, God bless you and Godspeed.
Thanks for listening to The Stone Zone with Roger Stone. You can hear The Stone Zone with Roger Stone weeknights at 8 on 77 WABC. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode, so you never have to wonder.
What the heck is going on here?